Tonight at this hour, talk about politics. Failed gubernatorial candidate Kari Lake stands alone as the last battleground state Republican, refusing to concede her race. In fact, late this week, according to the Washington Post, Lake flew down to Trump's Florida club to work with Trump and his team to, quote unquote, collect evidence in order to contest her defeat. She will not find that evidence, though. We can tell her that for free. And while Kari Lake lost and many swing state election deniers lost in the midterms, we need to issue a warning here to our viewers and to this country. Election denialism is not dead. We should all celebrate the big lie advocates who went down on election night, but here is the harsh reality that everyone should hear clearly. 62% of candidates who denied or cast doubt on Biden's 2020 election victory actually won their races for governor, Senate, House, or Secretary of State. Out of the 268 total candidates, 166 won and will soon hold incredible political power, crafting laws, overseeing elections, spewing misinformation. Now they'll be able to do so with official government titles in front of their names. And that's not even counting lower-level officials who also supported the big lie. And just hours ago, on his social platform, Trump himself continued to spread misinformation about the midterms. As Elaine Godfrey writes in The Atlantic, it would be foolish to pronounce "Stop the Steal" dead. An entire swath of the Republican Party is now open to the idea that any narrow loss can be blamed on fraud. So let me be clear here. The big lie didn't die on election night. We'll need to keep fighting it in the Georgia runoff in 2024 and likely beyond, because if repeated audits and cold, hard evidence haven't done enough to deter conspiracists these past 2 years, then a disappointing midterm cycle won't dissuade them either. Joining me now is Steve Simon, the newly re-elected Minnesota Secretary of State and Vice Chair of the Democratic Association of Secretaries of State. Secretary Simon, thank you so much for coming back on the program. We had you on the show just before the election, warning about these election deniers. It is great that so many went down in defeat, but as I just said, 62% of major big lie candidates won their races. Your reaction to that troubling number?
It is troubling. All I can say is that we have not yet broken the fever. I think we are a step closer since the election 11 days ago. I think the American people in state after state resoundingly said that they were on team normal, not on team extreme. And that, if anything, is what managed to at least slow down this Stop the Steal movement. But I'm under no illusion, like you, and that is that we're headed to a presidential election. And 2022, if anything, was a dress rehearsal for that. And I think we can count on some of the same old arguments, the really poisonous arguments, to come back at us. And it's not just about what happens after the election. It's what happens in the lead up to the election. And that starts now for the 2024 cycle.
Are you at all concerned, sir, that these election deniers who will soon be holding elected office could spread misinformation, or even worse, use that in their positions and God knows what they can do with it?
Yeah, I'm very concerned about that, sort of poisoning the well in advance of the 2024 election. The other thing I'm really worried about when you look to that election, which isn't as far away as you think, is this idea of not just questioning the result afterwards. We've seen a lot of that, and we're probably going to still see that in states like Arizona. But what I'm worried about is people using their position, or people who don't even have a position, trying to throw sand in the gears and delay or slow down or adversely impact the process as we're gearing up for the election. Let me just give you a quick example. In Minnesota and several other states, we've had outside political forces recruiting election judges, and that's fine. I absolutely think anyone who recruits an election judge from any point on the political spectrum, any political party, is okay. But in Minnesota and every state, you have to leave your politics at the door. In fact, in many states, people who work the polls swear an oath. They literally raise their hand and swear an oath to be fair and neutral and nonpartisan and impartial. And my worry is that outside groups increasingly are telling people to ignore that. And in Minnesota and other states, counseling them to do things that aren't just not impartial, not just things that put their thumb on the scale, but things that are actually potentially illegal. And possibly criminal. We saw some of those reports in Minnesota and in other states. That's my worry. Disinformation, not just people saying things that don't make sense and aren't borne out by the fact, but doing things that could sabotage elections beforehand.
Let me ask you about your state, if I can, and the elections in Minnesota. Were you pleased with how things went on Election Day?
Very. I mean, it was almost trouble-free. There were a few kind of normal glitches, but overwhelmingly, when it came to the machines, when it came to the poll workers, when it came to the noted absence of any threats or intimidation against voters, this was really almost a pitch-perfect election from an administrative standpoint.
As I mentioned, you're the Vice President of the Democratic Association of Secretaries of States. What did you learn from the wins against election deniers in these battleground states, including your own, that you can use, or how are you planning on using what you've learned, going forward into 2024?
Two things stand out to me in terms of looking back and what was successful, not just in Minnesota, but in most states where we had these struggles and these battles. One is to always lead with the truth. Wherever possible, lead with the truth. Say what the truth is in the face of the lies and in the face of the disinformation and propaganda. Now, I'm not naive, neither are you or your viewers. I'm not saying that simply saying what the truth is going to make the lies go away, or that the people who peddle them are just going to shrivel up and leave. Not everyone has to make a 180. Sometimes people can make a 17 or a 23 or a 38, and over time that can have an effect. And then the second thing that I think was a great lesson going forward, and this extends beyond 2024, is that transparency is our friend. That in state after state after state, when voters come to understand or become acquainted or reacquainted with the election system as it is, as it really functions in the real world, not as it's been explained or distorted on a social media feed or by a national political figure, when people come into contact with the system as it really is, they come away with a ton of confidence, because in state after state, the system is fair, accurate, honest, and secure. Never perfect, but very much sound and honest.
Hi, Steve Simon, Minnesota Secretary of State, sir. Always a pleasure. Thank you for coming back on the show, and look forward to continuing this conversation.
Thanks for having me.